We'd like to welcome you to this week's episode of Fearless Flight Live. We're here all together again, me and my able-bodied crew members here, Dieter Stautinger up in Toronto, Diane Hansen, and Eric Larson down here in Phoenix with me. Welcome to the show. This is a show for anybody who's afraid to fly, or if you know somebody who's afraid to fly, or if you just like to hang around and listen to us talk airplanes, and we do that too. So welcome. We're glad to have you, and keep coming back because it works. Actually, it sounds kind of like a 12-step meeting. So, okay. The first thing we like to do is remind you that we do have a Facebook Live group. It's called Fearless Flight Birds of a Feather. You can see the link on the screen there. And by the way, Dieter, I want to get our link for our 15-minute coaching call on that. We can post that down the road here too. But anyway, this is a place I encourage you, if you're not a member, go over and take a look at it and join. We do special things, and it's a special group because everybody contributes, giving and taking and helping each other out over there. So leave a reply there or a comment for us, and if you need some help or anything, don't hesitate to put a question in there. Okay, tonight, poll question: what keeps you grounded? We're going to talk in general about just getting over fear of flying. I've been doing some coaching. I noticed people are starting to come back into circulation. I've had some coaching calls here in the last 2 to 3 weeks. So people are thinking about it at least. And we've got some things related to that, some things going on in the industry. And we'll talk just in general terms about how you can get started getting over your fear of flying. So here's our poll question. If you want to put a comment in there, an answer there, what's keeping you grounded? Is it your fear of flying, or is it your fear of COVID-19, or is it something else? And so drop an answer in there while we go. If you're listening live, or even if you're watching the replay, put it in there, and we'll see the comments down the road there. We're going to talk about how you do slip the surly bonds and overcome your fear of flying. Like I said, we're going to touch on that a little bit tonight. And we have a segment for Diane there, coffee, tea, or me. No, coffee, tea, or safety. A little bit of a special bit of information get some tips from our resident flight attendant, and then we'll talk about an aviation news roundup. Not all that much new in the news, but we'll review some of the things out there that we've been following. So okay, so let's move on to overcoming your fear of flying. So everybody wants to know, how do you do that? Well, we're going to talk in some general terms. I've gathered some questions here that we talk about or that have come into us from people. These are triggers, basically, and these are in the exact words of the people who submitted them. What keeps them grounded? Knowing that they're so high up in the air. Obviously, if you read between the lines, that is related to heights, which directly isn't one of our inborn fears, but it is related to fear of falling, I believe. Knowing that I'm not in control, that's a fundamental issue for everybody. Sound of engine speed, or sound of the engines during takeoff, and the speed at takeoff, feelings during takeoff, and feeling like I can't breathe. And so we'll touch on those subjects as we go on here this evening. What we like to do is we have a formula that that fooled me.
Oh, sorry, yeah, there was a build in there.
Oh, didn't know that. Sorry.
That snuck up on all of us.
yeah, I thought Dieter put in another slide there. Anyway, so you can see feeling like I can't breathe, feeling like I can't sit in the same position, wanting to get up and move about, not enough air. That's not on the inside of the airplane, not on the outside. Thinking something will go wrong with the plane, not being able to get out all the time. And that pretty much comprises both types of triggers. You know, you've heard me talk about the fact that there's two different types of triggers. One we call mechanical. That's more related to the literal mechanics of flying, how it stays in the air, how it gets in the air, and maintaining it, pilot qualifications, pilot training, and things like that, and general safety measures. And then the other one is an emotional trigger, and that's the one that just it just grips you, and you just worry about you not being able to withstand that. And there was something that I've been doing some more research on, and this is something I learned years ago in my own therapy, something called the felt sense. And I'm just going to throw that out tonight. And a felt sense, did you ever meet somebody for the first time, and within a second you realized, or you had this thought that I don't really like that person, or I don't want to spend any more time than I have to with that. And that so if I were to ask you, what are you feeling when you experience that, you probably wouldn't be able to identify that. And I think that's really what a lot of you experience when it comes to fear of flying, because I've known over the years, when people are obviously in distress, you ask them, what are you feeling right now? And most of them can't identify any particular feeling. So it's something called the felt sense, and it really has its roots in trauma. It's what happens when you are traumatized, and it goes deeper than just emotion. And I wanted to mention that tonight, because that's one of the things that when we read through the list here, we're gonna do a little bit of work on those here in just a minute. When we read through that list, you'll see that more often than not, it's more of a felt sense that people experience rather than a specific feeling. I think the best way to describe one type of felt sense in that is dread. You can't explain it with anger, mad, glad, sad, and afraid, or anything like that. It's just a kind of an indescribable emotion called a felt sense and dread. So, okay. So with that, we use this formula that I stole from Jack Canfield, who stole it from someone else, and in his gift of giving, we'll give it out to you. And it's a formula called E plus R equals O. And this is the essence of changing your life in any way, but particularly useful as when we talk about fear of flying. Where event, and you can pop that slide up there if you want. Where E is an event in my life, and for our purposes, we'll say it's a trigger. It's something. It's one of those reported issues that on that list that I just had up there. R is my response, or the story I tell myself in response to that event. And then O is the outcome. So if I want to change the outcome, if I have an experience or an event, and for our purposes, again, those are triggers that we're going to call them. If I want to change my outcome to that, from dread or fear or agony, or some of the experiences that people report when they're afraid to fly, I have to change the response to that. If I don't, I'm going to end up with the same results. And so that's the essence of that. And we'll just kind of open up a discussion here amongst the four of us here, and we'll talk about some of those triggers that were on that list there in a little bit more detail. So put the next one up there if you would, Dieter. Mm-hmm. Okay. So when we talk about this, I touched on that briefly, knowing that I'm so high in the air. So the E about that would be, matter of fact, I was doing a coaching call last night, and the individual said he went out, he has a friend who has a light airplane. And so he thought, the friend said, he grabbed him spontaneously. He said, let's go flying. So he was open for that. He trusts his friend and all that, but he wasn't sure how it would work out. And so we got in there, and his big issues are some of these that are on the screen here, particularly takeoff and climbing. But a big one that he identified was when he gets at altitude in cruise flight, he looks down, looks out the window, and then it triggers his fear of heights. And so we were talking about that a little bit. And I said, well, how is it in the climb? And he said, I don't notice it in the climb. And I said, what are you thinking about in the climb? And he said, well, I'm just riding along and not worrying about it. And that's exactly what we want people to get to that point where they're distracted, because he's not worried about the climb. He can anticipate what's happening. It doesn't trigger that dread and anxiety in him. But once he levels off, then he's opened up with you might say some more free time, and he begins to look out the window and begins to tell himself a story that what would happen at that altitude if something went wrong. And then that's a whole nother exercise is to talk about what can go wrong from that point. So one of the things I talk to him about is, or I ask him, is what could go wrong. So I'll open it up to Eric here. What can go wrong when we're up there at cruise flight, Eric?
Well, the normal stuff that could go wrong when we're not at cruise flight, which is kind of a smart ass answer, but you and I have both said and told classes before, when we have all that altitude underneath us, we have lots of time to take care of stuff and lots of airports we can deviate to and lots of options. We don't have to do anything really fast. We have a lot of performance considerations that we don't have to make because the airplane doesn't have to climb anymore. We just have to drift down if we're going to deviate. So that's for us. If there's an abnormality, we don't say emergency anymore. We just say non-normal operation. If we have a non-normal issue, that gives
and where did we get that? Were we born with that divine knowledge of what to do and what can go, and just what can go wrong? Because I asked him, I said, what can go wrong? And the only thing he could think of was typically an engine quits and you're going down, or you're going to lose control. So where do we get that? Who are we to think we know what can go wrong? Where do we get that?
I think we pretty much got billions of data points from things that had gone wrong in the past before and made plans to deal with it, checklists, contingency plans to handle the sort of things that come up. They aren't common ever, as we pointed out, but things that have occurred are repetitive or common in nature. And we don't have checklists for if giant tentacles come out of the cloud and grab the airplane and shake the tar out of it, because that's never happened. But the quote unquote normal kind of stuff, there's an engine failure, there's a pressurization problem or a system problem, or we have degraded sort of systems like that. We have checklists and procedures to deal with all those kind of contingencies. And at altitude, there's a lot more time to do it than there is if we're screaming down the runway or just got the airplane in the air.
Yeah, I like to say that it's not Orville and Wilbur's airplane anymore. You know, so we have years and years of experience in all kinds of areas, operationally, in technology, in materials, and things like that. So and the things that Eric alluded to that can go wrong, that didn't come from us. We didn't have to think that up. That came from past experiences. And yes, tragically, sometimes it was catastrophes where airplanes did crash and people did die. But we learned that. And the thing that most fearful flyers overlook is that when you look at, if you use the safety of flying and the likelihood that you're going to die in worst case in an airplane crash, you have to also consider comparing it to automobiles, because you're safer than an airplane than you are anywhere else. So anyway, so we build on experience. We do have training. We train at least twice a year. And we have these magnificent machines called flight simulators that can reproduce virtually anything that can happen to us in the airplane. And we can practice things in the flight simulator that we would never even consider doing in an airplane, even if we didn't have passengers with us. So the point's well taken that we rely on that, and you don't have to worry about that. The only thing that you have to know is that there are 2 to 15 people on the airplane who know what to do. 2 being the pilots, and the rest being either the augmented pilots or the flight attendants, depending on the size of the crew there. Okay.
We should also point out, and I think we have before, that simulators now, with their ability to store data and digital information coming to the simulator, is the flight experience is so real, and it has been for 10 or 15 years, that you can go to school and never touch the airplane and fly the simulator and take all your check rides and come out, and your first flight in the airplane is with the passengers in the back. And it is completely exactly the same as it was as being in the simulator. That's not uncomfortable to you. The feel and everything's exactly the same. And it always cracks me up when I see Dieter, my first flight in the Airbus. I came out of a bazillion hours of Airbus sim time, which we have because it's a little different logic than the Boeings. And I went to Toronto in the winter, and you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, and the birds were walking. So it was just like we trained, and I get on there and follow the lights and taxi to the gate, and it's just like flying a simulator because I never got to see anything.
And you're talking about fog, I assume, Eric.
Snow. It was snowing. Snowing.
Okay.
Ice,
Low visibility. Yeah.
It was a nice summer day in Toronto. So, and I go, well, geez, it's my first flight. I'll have to wait the second one before I can see anything.
In fact, when the weather
done
with modern airplanes, with the technology and the advances that they've made, when the weather is extremely low visibility, you're not allowed to fly it manually to land it. You have to use George, the autopilot. And then we switch from a role of being the active operator of the flight controls, where we actually cause the airplane to, with our physical inputs to do what we want it to do, to a systems monitor. Believe me, we're not sitting there reading the newspaper when the birds are walking across the parking lot. We're watching things, and that's part of training as well. We have to know, we have sequences of lights and instruments and things that take place in the cockpit, and it becomes much more important for us to know if this doesn't happen, then we have a specific task that we have to accomplish. And the worst case scenario would be if it doesn't stay synchronized with the instrumentation, both on the airplane and on the ground, then we have to execute a missed approach or an aborted landing. And then we have to figure out what the problem was, or maybe it was the weather dropped below minimums or something. And then we come back around and land, or we go to an alternate then. So it's a very, very different world than when Eric and I first entered it. So, and going back to our formula, E plus R equals O, and the knowing that I'm so high up in the air. So again, if I don't do something to change the story I tell myself about that, I'm going to get the same results. So I have to learn, and you don't have to do it by yourself. That's why we do the Fearless Flight Live shows every week. That's why we have a website. That's why we have Facebook page and pages, and that's where you can go and get more information. You're not alone out there, and you have to. You're going to have to go outside yourself, because there's no way that you would know the things that Eric and I have learned, and Diane for that matter, and now Dieter. As far as, I don't know if we'd let Dieter have the controls unsupervised, but we'd sure let him up in the cockpit after all the times he spent listening to us. So, okay, let's go down there and let's move to the steps. Or one, let's see, go back to slide 7 there real quick, Dieter, and I'll kind of close that out. Okay, so again, I use these as an example. These came from real people like yourselves out there, and these are the things that bother them. And they may not be exactly your issues, but your issues are probably amongst them or very similar to that. And the point is you've got to educate yourself. And we're going to talk about that. Now we're going to talk about the process in general to get past these specific things, because once you get answers to these things, you now will not spend that time ruminating and making it worse in your mind. You'll be able to think about things that you've learned. And that's what people report back to us. Hey, thanks, Ron. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Diane. Thanks, Dieter, for the information you gave, because now I'm much more relaxed. And it doesn't bother, the things that bothered me before don't bother me like they used to down there. So we have a couple of general steps here that we recommend that you follow. This is the Fearless Flight method there. If you want to go to slide number 9.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There you go. So we're going to get hard with you. No blaming. Stop it. It's not that plane's fault. If you ride on airplanes, sometimes the witty flight attendant, after we make a hard landing, will say, it wasn't the pilot's fault. It wasn't anything. It was the asphalt. Little joke there. No blaming, no complaining, no excuses, and stop doing the same old thing. And if you can't stop doing the same old thing because you don't have any new things to switch to, that's where you want to contact us or somebody. Do not stay in the dark. Do not stay ignorant about that. Okay.
Now we're telling you guys to do this. Pilots can't do that, especially all 4 of those. No. Pilots cannot do that stuff. What's one of there's not that many great pilot jokes. One of my faves is, what's the difference between a jet plane and a pilot? And the answer is the jet plane quits whining when you park it at the gate. So
there you go.
That's only for you guys.
And the same thing for the flight attendants too.
Oh,
yeah. And I think Diane was telling Eric and I this afternoon that you, because of your experience in part, you were flying this last week and you had somebody that looked like they lost their best friend or something. And so when you asked them what happened.
Yes. She, as I was going up and down the aisles, she stopped me and I said, yes, can I help you with anything? And she asked me a question about the flight and so on. And it was obvious that she was a fearful flyer. And as we chatted and I said, I needed to go through the things that we have to do before we take off. I said, but I promise that I will come back and talk to you when we get up in the air. And she said, do you promise? And I said, yes, I do. And so I had an opportunity after we did get up to cruise to chat with her and talk with her about her fears and what kind of fears she had. And through the conversation and explaining to her that her fears were not uncommon, that she should not feel embarrassed, because she said, I'm so embarrassed. And I said, you have to understand, probably 25 to 30% of the people on this airplane right this very minute have some level of anxiety about flying. So you should not feel that way. And then we talked about a couple of things she could do, writing with her non-dominant hand, that sort of thing. But as we were talking, I said, so after 5 minutes or so, I said, well, how do you feel right now? And she said, well, I feel fine. And I said, that's because you've been distracted. You haven't thought about the things you were worried about. You've been talking with me. And anyway, at the very end of the flight, she said, I feel so much better. She said, thank you so very much. And it was really kind of an easy for me, maybe not quite as easy for her initially, to get past that sort of anxiety she was feeling. And so there, as Ron said, the E plus R equals O, the event she was experiencing and her response was changing over the course of the flight. And so the outcome became different. Her outcome was a positive one. So it can happen.
And in addition to to Diane's explanation and her consideration, she was making a connection with her. And
yes,
connection
definitely
stimulates oxytocin. And we used to think that it was just moms that had that because the first test that they checked on oxytocin levels were nursing mothers. But now I know that they have old farts like me, and who are just totally enamored with their pooches, like this guy.
Hey, Rocco.
And these guys don't know that I'm going to tell this story, but they actually did a test with a bunch of elderly men. Am I elderly? I guess I'm elderly.
Yeah.
And with their dogs, and they had them urinate. They took a urine sample, measured the level of oxytocin in it, had them play with their dogs for 30 minutes, and the oxytocin levels went up. So that's what happens when you take the courage or find the courage to ask for boarding early. When you announce to the flight attendant that greets you that you're a little nervous about flying and you'd like to meet the pilots. When you meet the pilots, you tell them very similarly, I'm a little nervous. Anything you can tell me about the flight today, which is what this lady did with Diane. And had Diane known that all along, she probably would have stopped by and checked on her anyway. But these are the things that you can do for yourself. And Diane correctly identified. The shame is most often the biggest liability that you all carry onto the airplane. You're not the first one.
No.
You won't be the last.
Remotely.
Yeah, but what a difference that Diane made in that. What a difference that woman made in her own life by having the courage to
speak up.
reach out. Yeah, so reaching out is a big thing. Okay, so
throw in when you meet the pilots, which is great when you get a chance to do that. if you have specific questions, I would lead with those, because if you ask them, is there anything you could tell me about the flight? You're highly likely to get a War and Peace novel, and you'll nod off somewhere before the second half of the book. So there's specific things you're wondering about. I would lead with that. I'm just throwing it out there.
And I gotta just say, because Eric, I know that you and Oliver during our Clear for Takeoff 201 online class, that you guys were paired up there, and Oliver said, when I had the opportunity to introduce myself to the pilots, I couldn't believe how small the cockpit was.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And just, in all fairness, Oliver, runs into burning houses for a living. So,
Yeah.
um,
So go figure. Go figure. Go to slide 10, Dieter. Here's the slide. You can find a gazillion of these on the internet. This is somebody that I know through someone else, and so I just thought it was an appropriate place to use that. Stop making excuses. We're all good at that as human beings. This is a fellow. His name happens to be Kyle Maynard, and he was born. And he had a disease that actually caused him to lose his arms below his elbows and his legs below his knees, or around the knees. And so he's been like this since he was, I believe, in his toddler years. And he's done a gazillion things of unbelievable acclaim, including climbing K2 without any prosthetics. Twice he's done that. And so it's pretty amazing. And he's a public speaker now, and he has a family and everything, but it's a great story. So, I'm not trying to shame you or myself or anybody, but these are inspirational people out there. And you would think if anybody has a reason to blame and shame and feel bad about themselves, it would be people like Kyle, and they're out there to inspire us. And I recommend anybody. That's why the chicken soup books were so great. They just make you feel good, and you produce things like oxytocin. It gets you out of your head and into your heart and into your body there. So, okay. So the moving on then
So we got to the steps now.
Number 11. Yeah. So on number 11 there, so the main thing is you have to take action. If you don't do anything, in the case of Diane here, if that woman had not responded to Diane there, she had not taken any action like that, she would have been stuck with the same results, sitting there ruminating about how badly she felt and how worried she was about things that were really right at her fingertips. I've had a number of people that when I was flying from oftentimes to go meet a fearful flyer to do some custom coaching with them and fly with them. And I remember inevitably I will sit next to someone and the conversation will turn to flying. I will be able to, you can see when people are nervous, and I'll say, are you a little nervous? And they'll go, oh my God, I'm terrified. And I'll say, well, this may or may not be your lucky day. And then tell them what I do and stuff. And in a heartbeat, their mind is off onto something else. And the flight is an improvement over their last experience there. So the first step is you got to take action. And then once you take action, you've got one of the things that we recommend is the Fearless Flight method. Is the first thing is increase your awareness, educate yourself, learn something. It can be as simple as asking a crew member. It can be as simple as asking to board early. It can be anything like that. Sending emails to any of us on the team here, anything like that. You've got to know more in order to do better. When you know better and know more, you do better automatically. And then the next thing is once you do increase your awareness, now you've got choices, and with choices come opportunities, right? The more, I don't know about you, but I know in my life, when you grow up, your life is about doing the same thing over and over again. So when you learn something new every day, you become aware of more choices, and then you can experience change. And change is only possible from increasing your awareness, learning where you have choices where you perhaps didn't know that you had before. Okay. We've been kind of in a little bit of a mode here recently where we like to share with you, use Diane's expertise and talk about give you some tips there. So I put this in the form of a little Jeopardy game there, titled it Coffee, Tea, or crossed out the me and safety, if you know that was a title of a book. And again, I know I'm showing my age because that came out in the 60s. But a little flight attendant Jeopardy. The category is safety tips for 1,000, and the answer is bins and bags, cords and handbags and tray tables. And the question is, click the magic mouse. Click the magic
do we want to give people a chance to write something?
No, we're going to lay it right on them, and Diane's going to tell them about it.
There you go.
So the question is, just like Jeopardy, what precautions do flight attendants warn you about prior to taxiing and takeoff and landing? So talk about this a little bit, because this is two things about this. One, it's one of the things that people get annoyed about when the flight attendants are doing their duties and they're giving them little tips to make them safer. And the other one is when you become no longer afraid to fly or you fly a lot, you forget about it. So talk about that, Diane.
Well, and that's something that's really important that you mentioned, Ron, is that for people who have flown a lot, they have a tendency to kind of, I don't want to say drift off, but they are no longer paying as much attention or any attention to.
We go unconscious. That's a
they really do. They kind of zone out, and they're on their phones and they're not paying any attention to us. And we, at the same time, we understand that, but at the same time, it's still not a good idea, because if there's going to be a problem statistically, it's in the first few minutes after takeoff and the last few minutes before we land. And that's really when everyone needs to be paying attention, and on a lighter note, keeping your shoes on and taking the earbuds out, those kinds of things, that the frequent flyers, it's kind of a double-edged sword. They understand the sounds of the airplane. They understand when, after we take off and you guys up front, bring the throttle back a little bit. So they understand those kinds of things, but they don't really have not embraced the notion that something could go wrong. And we are trying, because as flight attendants, our first job is safety. I mean, we do want to give you a Diet Coke if we can, but our basic job is safety for ourselves, for our pilots, and for our passengers. And we have to worst case scenario every single flight. And so the list that you were putting up. So number one, virtually everything we are doing, irrespective of the airline, is mandated by the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. So the kinds of things we require are required of us that we are requiring of our passengers. And very often the things we say, we have to say verbatim. This is not the time when we are winging it. I mean, we can do that to a certain degree at other times, but there are certain announcements that we must give verbatim, and there are several things that we must do. So for example, we cannot close the main cabin door, the boarding door, unless the bins are closed and your bags are stowed. Why is that? Again, it's safety. Obviously, the bins have to be shut, because if there is any movement, even prior to takeoff, where something could come out of the bin, then that's a safety hazard. More people are injured by things coming out of the overhead bins than during turbulence. Those are statistics. And the same thing with regard, one of the things we have to do in our what we call our sweep. So we give an announcement, we have to sweep the cabin. So one or both of us on my aircraft, flight attendants, are walking up and down the aisles. We're not doing it just for exercise. We're doing it and we're looking and we're looking, and we're not trying to decide whether or not we like your outfit or your shoes. We're trying to decide, one, if you have your seatbelt buckled. That's it. That's as I talk to my passengers. This is not a guideline. This is a rule. Everybody's got to have their seatbelt buckled. And then we have to make sure that the tray tables are stowed. Why is that? If there's any kind of movement, jerky movement, we don't want you slamming into the the tray table, the seat back has to be forward. And people are like, oh man, I was just trying to relax. Well, what happens when your seat back is back a little bit, that encroaches on the space of the passenger in back of you. And if we all need to get out of the aircraft, then that hampers that individual's ability to get out of his or her seat if your seat back is back. A big one that a lot of people don't understand, and that I'm kind of death on wheels about, is whether or not your bags are stowed completely underneath the seat in front of you. And depending on the size of the aircraft and the amount of space that's there, and a lot of people have backpacks, they have big straps and all kinds of things are dangling. And I'm always reminding everyone that has to be push, shove, crammed all the way underneath the seat in front of you. Turn it sideways so there's more space. And they look at me like I have 3 or 4 heads. And what they don't understand, the FAA requires us to be able to evacuate an aircraft within 90 seconds. Every single passenger has to be evacuated in 90 seconds with one exit blocked, and we would not know which one. This is part of our training. And so if we look at that and people say, well, I can get out. Well, if all of a sudden the plane is bouncing around, we come to a screeching halt, whatever the situation, that bag, if it's not stowed properly, can come out. You can trip on it, which is the same thing with women. And I always ask women or anyone who has a handbag or some kind of strap around their neck, for surface movement, you need to take that off and stow it. Why? If all of a sudden you had to get out of your seat and you're leaning forward, that could snag on an armrest. If it snags on an armrest, not only are you not getting out, but the passenger sitting next to you isn't getting out. And so all of these things, it's kind of like house of cards. If you can't get out and you block the aisle because you've tripped, it's not that you can't get out, but you've blocked everybody behind you or everyone in front of you from getting out. And if there is an emergency, the chances of a flight attendant being next to you, for example, to open the emergency exit doors, are virtually nil. The flight attendant in forward is going to be buckled in. I'm going to be buckled in my aft. And so we absolutely need to have those people in the exit rows able to open those doors without bags and handbags and cords and everything else in the way. And so when we go through the aisle and we say, please stow that bag, we're not just trying to be mean and nasty and pick on you. It's everything we do has a component of safety. We are worst case scenario every single item. And so when I look at you, honest to God, I know you love your backpack and you know you love your handbag and you want to have a death grip on it. But just for those critical moments, please just stow it so you're not creating a safety hazard for everybody else. So, I mean, that's kind of what our job is. And I'm looking out for everybody. I want all of us to get where we're going safely.
Yeah, and so despite the routine nature of flying, the very thing that we tell you why you don't need to worry about dying in a plane crash, but the antithesis of a bad day the thesis of a bad day would be if we have to get you out of there in a hurry. So we practice every takeoff and every landing. We approach both of those circumstances. That's the only time when you will ever have to worry about getting out. You remember that list that was up there? It says, I want to be able to get out fast enough. That's what this is all about. We don't want you to grab and be strangled by your purse strap around your neck, grabbing or gets caught on a chair back or something like that. Right. And that's the main thing we do is we approach every takeoff and landing as if it was going to be the last thing that we do. Last one. Yeah. And the other thing
and we do briefings, and these guys know that we do a briefing before passengers board, the flight attendants and the pilots. We have a group meeting, so to speak. It may be very brief. We find out the length of the flight, the altitude. If there's going to be turbulence, we need to know if there's anything obviously broken on the plane, but which isn't. But we talk to one another before the first passenger gets on board to find out what this flight is going to be like. And then the flight attendants, the two of us, we talk. Okay, what are you going to do? What am I going to do? What are our mutual responsibilities? That sort of thing. So there's an incredible amount of conversation and communication that takes place before the first person ever boards the plane. So we are all on the same, we're all on the same page when it comes to what's going to happen with the next hour, 2 hours.
Yeah. So just pay attention. Forewarned is forearmed, and we wish you the best. Okay. Thanks, Diane. Moving on to just a little bit of talk about the industry. I just saw an article that came out a couple days ago about the aviation industry, which is still hemorrhaging big bucks. And they made a point that as of January 20th or January of this year, the airlines had reported record profits. By March 1st, everything was still going well. Just 2 weeks later, March 15th, the airlines lost, in those 2 weeks alone, they lost $8 billion. And right now they're humming along worldwide, losing about $5 billion per month. 9/11, I mean, the concerns out there is when is this going to come back? And at 9/11, it took a full 3 years for the traffic levels to come back to where they were pre 9/11. This is going to be a different ballgame. Eric and I, we're pretty much betting our money that the vaccine is going to be the thing that probably has the greatest impact on people, despite the fact that the airlines they're probably the cleanest place you could be right now. And we've done shows in the past couple of weeks. You might want to go back and review on how just the airflow alone. We had our special guest Arnold Burnett with us 3 or 4 weeks ago, and Arnold was talking about a study that he had done that had been done to show just the airflow alone on the airplane makes it less likely that you'll get free moisture in the air that might be contaminated and be affected by that, just because it's there. And then that doesn't count wearing your mask and the HEPA filters that are a part of every airline air conditioning system. So I'm not directly involved anymore. Eric's retired like I am. However, Diane is. We need your money. They need your money. So we want to keep you grounded in that. And tonight, I hope you'll just take a look and maybe reflect a little bit. What is the reason, if you're not flying, that you have decided not to? And these guys were telling me, I wasn't aware of it myself. What was the story about out of Thailand and Australia where they went on a joyride?
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Somebody hijacked your airplane? No. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have made that joke.
Yes.
Okay.
So that may be hard to understand or hard to kind of really allow to sink in for some of you who are watching here, but there are a lot of people who miss flying, and so much so that and airlines miss passengers so much so that they had to come up with ways to fill those planes. And Qantas, the Australian airline, basically sold what they dubbed a boomerang flight. And for those of you who don't know, boomerang is an Australian hunting weapon. You kind of throw it and it comes back to you. And that flight left from Sydney and then flew, I think, about a 2.5 hour sightseeing tour of the area. They got permission to fly a little bit lower than the usual limitations there. And then they landed back in Sydney, and people were prepared and did pay for economy, premium economy, first and business, and the entire flight was sold out in less than 10 minutes.
Wow.
The same happened in Taiwan, and there are other, airlines around the globe that are, being innovative, offering different things that they hope brings in people to fly. There's also people who do, I don't know if you guys have heard that, but in I think it's in Belgium, but also in the Netherlands, where you can literally go and have an airline dining experience. And I'm not kidding. Sky chefs, everything. You just never take off. So you do
Yeah.
Go into the airport, you go through security, you go to the gate area. It's really an entertaining show from what I've, kind of seen.
And our friend Talat, who owns Air Hollywood,
Air Hollywood,
where we do our classes, when we do our classes in Burbank over there. Talat actually has a venue now. He's got a lot. It's an aviation themed studio, and he reclaimed a 747, an old Pan Am 747 front end of the airplane with the double deck and all that, and they have it configured, and they have actresses from Hollywood come out and play, and they do a vintage 1970s flight, never leaving the warehouse, of course, and they do the same thing that Dieter's talking about, treat everybody to the nostalgic view of the past.
If you search Air Hollywood and Pan Am, you'll see they did a really
Pan Am Experience.
Pan Am Experience. They do a really great job in
and as a matter of fact, after 9/11, I had my largest classes ever. I had 150 people in the first class after 9/11, because we weren't flying for 4 days, and because we just had plenty of airplanes because the schedule was so sparse. I went to management at America West Airlines at the time, and I asked the CEO, I said, hey, if I can find friends of mine who are crew members, and they will fly, they'll donate their flight time that they would normally be paid, would you consider supplying us with an airplane? Because we had plenty of spares. And they said, sure. And we actually had the Today Show come out and take part in this class. And it was the largest flying class we had. We had about 50 people on this 737. And they got the thrill of their lives. Now, they were all afraid to fly, so it wasn't like it was nothing. But we took off, and I had two good friends up in the cockpit. I stayed in the back there, and one of them, he put a ton of gas on it. We just burned holes in the sky over the Grand Canyon. We sightseed. We literally just burned a bunch of money that day. It was one of the most memorable times in my experience with Fear of Flying. And we duplicate it on a revenue flight going here to Las Vegas or Burbank and back, something like that.
And let me just jump in. There were a couple of questions. One of them was Tracy. So we are working, and Oliver, thank you for jumping in and commenting. We're working on a hybrid model where we do the teaching portion that we either did in a hotel in Phoenix before going on the flight, or at Air Hollywood. So we're going to do that part, offering that part online. And then we do plan to have dates, in Phoenix and hopefully in California as well, where we do go on a flight. But right now there's just so much flux and so much, regulatory ups and downs, and it's really hard to plan anything.
We can't even do our live classes in the Phoenix airport right now because they haven't opened it up again. But that is our goal, and it's like many other things. There are things the way we used to do business we won't do anymore, and one of them is Dieter and I have spent a lot of effort on this, and we're going to put it up online, the basic education for that, and then it will allow us to meet some of your requests. Hey, come and fly, come and put a class on in Atlanta, put a class on in New York. And we actually are anticipating being able to do that. It won't be tomorrow, but we're doing the infrastructure and creating the online classes so that you can do that. So you can take the class online, and then we'll come into town and we'll all go flying the next day or something like that. So, all right.
By the way, I want to just say to all of you who love, most of you, Airbus 380, that was, I remember the first time I stepped on one of those things. I'll never forget it. Teenagers, it was the best thing in my life. And unfortunately, Lufthansa is mothballing all of theirs. So now it'll be really hard to fly on an Airbus 380.
Yeah, so, it's going the way that the 747 did.
I think ITAD is still operating them.
Are they?
Oh, ITAD?
I think so. Needless to say, they don't have a fuel shortage over there.
Yeah.
How long that goes on,
no kidding.
Who knows?
That's like the 747. The very first time I was on a 747 was in April of 1971 on United, nonstop from Chicago to Honolulu, and the 747 was in their fleet only for about 8 or 9 months at that point, and
Yeah.
it was the most elegant flight ever. But
It's like
I wonder if everybody
riding
gets
in
a
a
window.
house.
Does everybody get a window seat on those flights to nowhere? If I got an aisle or a middle, I'd be kind of miffed.
I
Yeah.
know, but they
They-
probably served food.
Oh,
We don't even,
yeah,
we
they
don't
did.
even do that now. They
They
probably
should play
got to-
musical chairs though, and you stop, and then everybody gets the.
everybody gets to look out a window.
All right, enough of this levity. Thanks to you guys. Thanks to everybody for watching out there, and we really appreciate it. We love helping you out when we can. We love answering your questions. So keep those cards and letters coming, folks. And we'll see you back here again next week for Fearless Flight Live. Thanks a lot, and have a great week, everybody. And
Bye.
get in the